Welcome. I'm William the winemaker. I'm the winemaker here at Layton's Chance Winery in Vienna, Maryland, and I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about wine labels. A lot of wine labels out there, and they all seem to have different information on it. What does it all mean? So I thought I'd explain a little bit of that today as best I could. I've got some wines from our winery here, but our labels don't show everything that's out there, so I've got some wines and wine labels from other wineries too, just to show kind of what some of them say and what they mean. Start with the most basic thing. What winery is it from? For most wines, that's right at the top. You can see here for our winery, Layton's Chance, that's right at the top. For some other wineries, this one is 1924 Winery. This one is Jacobs Creek Winery, right up at the top. Or Bully Hill Winery. They're usually there. European wines can be a little different, especially, all the European wines, because they have a tradition of a lot of times putting the area they're from instead of just the winery it comes from on there at the top. The winery is less important than the region it comes from. So this doesn't always apply to French wines, German wines, Spanish wines. But in general, for American wines, you're going to find that. Then the next thing you want to know is what's the name of the wine. For a lot of dry wines, your name is going to be the same as your variety. So this would be a Vidal Blanc wine right there. For this one, it would be a Zinfandel wine. For this one, a Shiraz wine. Now when it has a variety like that, that's actually the variety of the grape. Merlot, Chardonnay, Chambourcin, Vidal Blanc, those are all actual grape varieties, and the wine comes from that specific grape. People like to have the variety name on there because they know what to expect. You know when you have a Merlot that is a certain type of wine. When you have a Vidal Blanc, that is a certain type of wine. There's differences, but in general, people like those varieties. Blends can be a little more of an unknown. So if you have Joe's Cool Red, or one that just says red wine blend, you're not as sure what you're getting in there. However, I will tell you, blends in general are better than varietals, because when you take two wines and you have this flavor and put them together, you have more overall flavor. And winemakers, when they make blends, can take, if this one has a little too, not enough acid, or too high a pH, or a little tartness in it, or astringency, they can balance that out with another wine. So blends are really great, but consumers don't always like it because they don't have as much idea of what they're expecting. So you find both of them out there. Anything that is a varietal will have the date on there. 2017 for this one, 2013, and certainly you can have, this is a Chambourcin that's 2013 for us. This is a Chambourcin that's 2014. A lot of people have the mistaken idea that that's when the wine is made. It is not when the wine is made. It's when the grapes are grown. And it's really important because a winemaker does a certain amount in the winery, but wine is all about the grapes and where those grapes are grown and how they're grown and the flavor that comes out of those grapes. So what winemakers really care about and want to show off is when the grapes are grown. Very, very rarely does that date also show when the wine is made, because wine usually takes a lot longer than that. Sometimes, really on the short side, you're talking about 6 months, but if you've got grapes that are picked in September, they're not bottled till March of the next year. That's at least a year later. But it can be up to 3 years. I know a lot of winemakers that when you're putting it in a barrel for anywhere from 6 to 18, even up to 24 months, and then you're blending it after that, you can have a wine that is being bottled in 2019 that those grapes weren't grown until say 2016. So 2016 is what still would go on that bottle in that case. So really important to know, because when they talk about good vintages, those were good conditions for the grapes to be grown in. So origin is certainly a big deal. Again, you'll find those on wines here. All our wines are Maryland vintages because we're in Maryland. And some places, so like this one will show not only Argentina, the country, Mendoza. You'll have ones, it shows Australia. Oh, there we go. So some of them have not just the state, but Lodi, California and Lodi. So what that shows is an AVA, an American Viticulture Area. And what that shows is like Napa, Sonoma, Lodi, and there's hundreds of others around the country. But when somebody kind of marks out and records that this area is different for growing grapes than the areas around it. You know, in California, there's a lot. Napa is very different than Sonoma. It has different weather conditions, it has different soil conditions, and so they've put in a petition to say, we want to be recognized as being different than other parts of California. And then they can put that on the bottle. I'm not in an AVA. You have to go through a long, expensive process to be recognized as an AVA. We really don't have enough wineries in our area here to set that up, so we can only put Maryland. And unfortunately, since we're not in an AVA, even though for all of our dry wines, they're all estate grown, we're not allowed to put that they're estate grown because there's just weird rules. So that's one of the rules. Even though we have estate wines, we can't put estate wines because we're not in an American viticulture area. So certainly another thing that you often see on wine labels, reserve. And I often get asked about this. This one doesn't say reserve, but it says limited edition. I often get asked, what does that mean? What is a reserve wine? Well, legally, reserve doesn't have any meaning. A winery gets to choose that meaning and say what it is. We don't have to follow any specific definition. So for most wineries, what it means is these grapes are the best of the best. We took a small portion of the best grapes. We spent a lot more time on that wine, put more time and attention to it, and made the best wine we could from the best grapes, and that's our reserve. I often give it when I have just a small amount of good grapes, especially my Norton and my Cabernet Franc. Sometimes I may only have a small harvest from them, and that's a reserve because that's a very limited quantity. I spent a lot of time on it because that's all I had, and so I make a reserve out of those. For my Vidal and my Chambourcin, because those are usually much bigger harvests, I'll take, this was the best out of my Chambourcin. That's the reserve. Certainly don't make them every year, only when we have grapes that I feel are worthy of the name reserve. Certainly another thing that everybody asks about is sulfites, contains sulfites. Almost every wine contains sulfites. It has to have that label on it. The only wines that don't contain the label are organic wines, and even they contain some amount of sulfites because sulfites are natural to the process. What are sulfites? Should I worry about them? What do they do? First of all, what they do is they preserve the wine. They do two different things. They're an antioxidant. What does that mean? Wine can oxidize. When you cut an apple open and it turns brown, that's oxidation. The same thing can happen to wine, and putting sulfites in there helps prevent that so the wine doesn't turn brown and change flavor. It also is an antimicrobial, so it kills bacteria that might be in the wine. Bacteria, germs, are what can turn wine into vinegar, so we're just making sure that that doesn't happen in the bottle. The sulfites can kill those. People that are allergic to sulfites, it's usually a breathing problem of some kind. They're not what give you headaches. There is a different chemical in red wines that can give certain people headaches. It's not the sulfites, though. They give you breathing problems if you're allergic to it. And there are less sulfites than are found in many other places and many other foods. Those other foods aren't labeled as such just because it's alcohol, and alcohol always has different rules. So we take measurements in the winery. I measure it at least every month, sometimes every couple weeks, to make sure my sulfites are as low as possible while still being able to do the job that they need to do. Certainly one of the things you can see on there is a description of what happens to the wines. So this wine shows that it is unoaked Chardonnay. You also might see stainless steel on there, or sometimes naked Chardonnay. And then sometimes it will talk about being barrel aged or oaked. And this is just a description of how the wine was made. It means that the wine was put in a barrel or had oak added to the wine or not. And oak is used to enhance the flavor and the mouthfeel of the wine. It adds tannins to the wine. It helps the aging potential of the wine. It gives it that longevity and that big mouthfeel and the tannins that really fill up your mouth. Not everybody likes that, though. So some wines advertise the unoaked, the naked Chardonnays, things. But you don't have to put that on there, so you don't see it on everyone, and you really don't know which is which. Some wines just like to advertise that they aren't looking for certain people, and some like to advertise that they are. So it's not consistent. So one of the descriptions that you often find on bottles, maybe like Old Vine Zinfandel. What does that mean? Old vine just means that this wine came from grapevines that have been in the ground for a long time. There's no definition of old vine. That's up to the winemaker. So they could say, old vine to me means 100-year-old vines, and there are 100-year-old vines out there. Grapevines are really, really hardy. They can stay around for a long time. Could be 75, could be 50 years, could be 15 or 20 years if that's what the winemaker decides is an old vine. So it's up to the winery and the wine, but just another description that they put on there that they like. So one of the descriptions that's out there a lot is dry versus sweet. So you may see on there like this one, dry white wine. You may see like this one, sweet red wine. Or you may see like this one, semi-sweet wine. One of the things we don't do, but that some wineries like to do, to kind of put it a little more in perspective, is to give you a sweetness scale, dry to sweet, and kind of show you where that wine ends up right along the scale there. What is dry wine just means that there's no sugar in there, or at least very little sugar, because again, there's no definition of dry versus sweet. It's whatever the winery decides that it is. Most wineries will define dry in technical terms as less than 1% sugar in there, because really less than 1% sugar you can't taste. It's just in there to maybe offset a little bit of the acidity, or to make it just a little less tart, but you can't really taste the sweetness itself. Once you get more than that, you can taste that sweetness, but where everybody defines the sweet versus semi-sweet, up to each winery. So you really kind of have to taste it to figure out what you like and what you don't. What some consider a sweet wine, another winery may consider a semi-dry wine, depending on what kind of wines they make overall. And then lastly, there's a lot of images on there. We deal a lot with farm images. That's our farm and our storage. And would you do tractors, an old plow? Because we've been a farm for over 50 years. So we embrace our farm heritage and the farming that we do, and that's what we want to show off on the wine labels. So it gives the winery a chance to show what their winery is about. Although a lot of times you find wine labels that are just funny. The Maryland Merlot is kind of the example of that. Mommy's Time Out, things like that. Just meant to catch your eye and make you notice the wine. One thing that wine marketers can tell you, though, is if you put an animal on the label, you're like 50% more likely to sell the bottled wine. So there's a lot of things that catch the eye, but overall it's just a way to let people know a little bit about what the winery is and who they are and what their images is. So these are a few things about wine labels. It's hard to get into all of it. If you have any questions, please, in the description below you can find my email address. Send me an email and I'll be happy to either answer you or maybe make another video about it. So thank you. Please stop by our winery sometime, and hopefully we'll talk again.